Before there were books, before there were schools, before people could even write things down, there were stories. Stories about gods who controlled the sea, about heroes who fought monsters, about wars that lasted 10 years. These stories are Greek mythology, and today we are going to find out exactly how they started, how they survived, and why it took hundreds of years before anyone wrote them down. To understand Greek mythology, you have to go back to the very first Greeks. Around 1600 BC, a civilization called the Mycenaeans rose to power on the mainland of Greece. These were real people. They built massive stone palaces. They had kings, armies, and trade routes that stretched across the Mediterranean Sea. Their most famous city was called Mycenae. That is where their name comes from. The Mycenaeans were skilled warriors. They fought battles. They sailed to foreign lands. They traded with Egypt and the Middle East. They were powerful. We know this because archaeologists have found their ruins. They have found pottery, weapons, gold masks, and most importantly, clay tablets covered in an early form of Greek writing called Linear B. These tablets are not stories. They are records, lists of goods, names of workers, inventories of the palace. But the Mycenaeans did have stories. They told them out loud, around fires, in great halls, during festivals. These stories were about their gods and their heroes. They were the beginning of what we now call Greek mythology. Then, around 1100 BC, everything collapsed. No one is completely sure what destroyed the Mycenaean civilization. Historians call it the Bronze Age collapse, and it didn't just hit Greece. It wiped out civilizations all across the Eastern Mediterranean at roughly the same time. Here is what we know. Around 1200 to 1100 BC, the palace centers of Mycenae were destroyed. Trade stopped. The population dropped sharply. People scattered into small, isolated villages. The writing system, Linear B, disappeared completely. Nobody was writing anything anymore. What caused it? Historians point to several things working together. There is evidence of invasions. A group known as the Sea Peoples attacked many regions during this period. There is also evidence of drought and crop failures, which would have caused famine. Earthquakes hit several Mycenaean cities, and when trade networks broke down, the whole economic system that held these palace societies together fell apart. It was not one thing. It was everything at once. The result was what historians call the Greek Dark Ages. This period lasted from roughly 1100 BC to 800 BC, about 300 years. The word dark does not mean things were evil or scary. It means we don't have much information from this time. The written records stopped. The grand palaces were gone. The population of Greece shrank significantly. People were living in much smaller communities. They were farming to survive. There was very little long-distance trade. Contact between different regions of Greece and the wider Mediterranean world fell away. Here is the important part. This is when the stories almost disappeared. The Mycenaeans had built a rich world of myths, stories of Zeus and Hera, of Poseidon and Athena, of great heroes and terrible monsters. These stories were part of their culture, their religion, their identity. But with no writing system left, the only way to keep these stories alive was to say them out loud, over and over again, generation after generation. That is exactly what happened. Oral tradition means passing stories down by speaking them, not writing them. This was the only option during the Greek Dark Ages. There were professional storytellers called bards or ahoidos in ancient Greek. These were not just people who liked to tell stories. This was their job. They were trained. They memorized enormous amounts of material. They performed at feasts and gatherings, singing or reciting stories with the help of a stringed instrument called a lyre. These bards used special techniques to help them remember. They used repeated phrases, what scholars call stock phrases or epithets. For example, in Homer's poems, the sea is almost always called the wine-dark sea. Achilles is almost always called swift-footed Achilles. These repeated phrases acted like memory anchors. They made it easier to remember thousands of lines of poetry. The stories were not just entertainment. They served a purpose. They explained the world. Why does the sun move across the sky? Because the god Apollo drives a chariot. Why do earthquakes happen? Because Poseidon, god of the sea, is angry. They gave people a way to understand things they could not explain scientifically. They also taught values. Stories about heroes showed people what courage looked like. Stories about hubris, which means too much pride, showed people what happened when someone thought they were better than the gods. The mythology was a moral instruction manual, passed down through storytelling. For 300 years, this is how the stories survived. Not on paper, not on clay tablets, in the memories of bards, spoken out loud, performed for audiences who had heard the same stories their whole lives. Around 800 BC, Greece began to recover. Population grew, trade came back, and something very important happened. The Greeks adopted a new alphabet, borrowed and adapted from the Phoenicians of the Eastern Mediterranean. Writing came back, and now it was easier than before. Linear B had been a complicated system only trained scribes could use. The new Greek alphabet was simpler, more people could learn it. This is when the stories finally got written down. The most famous person to do this was Homer. He is credited with writing two massive epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Iliad is about the Trojan War. The Odyssey is about the hero Odysseus trying to get home after that war. Here is something important to know. We are not 100% sure Homer was a single person. Some historians think Homer might be a name attached to a tradition, a collection of stories that were shaped by many bards over centuries. What we do know is that these poems, written down around the 8th century BC, are the oldest surviving works of Greek literature. After Homer, other poets followed. Hesiod wrote the Theogony, which explained the origin of the gods and works and days. These texts are the foundation of what we know as Greek mythology today. But it is critical to understand Homer and Hesiod were not inventing these stories. They were writing down stories that had already been told for hundreds of years. The myths were old. The writing was new. Some of the stories in Greek mythology may be based on real events from the Mycenaean period. The Trojan War, for example, is one of the central stories of Greek mythology. For a long time, historians thought Troy was just a made-up place. Then, in the 1870s, an archaeologist named Heinrich Schliemann excavated a site in modern-day Turkey called Hisarlik. He found the ruins of a real city, a city that had been destroyed by war. Many historians now believe this could be the real Troy, destroyed around 1180 BC, during the final years of the Mycenaean civilization. This means the stories that Homer wrote down in the 8th century BC may contain memories of real events from 400 years earlier, kept alive through oral tradition across the entire Greek Dark Ages. That is an extraordinary thing. So here is the complete picture. The Mycenaeans built the first great Greek civilization and told stories about their gods and heroes. Their civilization collapsed around 1100 BC beginning the Greek Dark Ages. For 300 years, with no writing system, bards kept the stories alive by memorizing and performing them out loud. When writing returned around 800 BC, poets like Homer and Hesiod finally wrote those stories down. And the mythology we read today is the result of all of that. Thousands of years of real history, real people, and real storytelling. Greek mythology did not come from nowhere. It came from memory.